The quiet hospital room was completely dark. A brave soldier lay helpless in a deep sleep. He had found out a terrible secret in the mountains. Now, an evil sheriff was here to make sure he never woke up. The sheriff walked slowly toward the bed. He held a deadly poison needle in his hand. He was just 1 second away from ending the soldier's life. But the sheriff did not know that a massive German shepherd was hiding in the dark under the bed. Right before the needle touched the soldier, the brave dog leaped out from the shadows to protect his master. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. Jasper shifted the gears of his old truck as it climbed the winding mountain road. The tires crunched over loose gravel. Outside his window, the Appalachian Mountains stretched for miles. Thick green forests covered the rolling hills under a bright blue sky. Jasper breathed in the crisp air. He needed this quiet space. Jasper was an active-duty Navy SEAL. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with a muscular build and short dark hair. His brown eyes were always scanning, always analyzing his surroundings. Years of dangerous missions had left him exhausted. His commanding officer had ordered him to take a month of leave to rest. Sitting in the passenger seat was Shadow. Shadow was a large German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat. He had sharp, alert ears and intelligent golden eyes. Shadow was a former rescue dog. Jasper had adopted him 2 years ago after returning from a tough deployment. Since that day, the dog had never left his side. Shadow rested his head on the open window frame. He sniffed the rushing wind. "We are almost there, buddy," Jasper said. Shadow turned his head and gave a soft bark. He wagged his tail, hitting it against the leather seat. Jasper steered the truck down a narrow dirt path. A small wooden cabin appeared between the tall pine trees. It looked rustic and isolated. That was exactly what Jasper wanted. He parked the truck and turned off the engine. The silence of the forest immediately surrounded them. It was a heavy, peaceful silence. Jasper opened his door and stepped out. Shadow jumped out right behind him. The dog immediately began to patrol the area. Shadow kept his nose to the ground, checking the perimeter of the cabin. He sniffed the bushes, the porch steps, and the firewood pile. Shadow treated this vacation like a military operation. He always made sure his owner was safe. Jasper grabbed his heavy olive-green duffel bag from the back of the truck. He unlocked the front door of the cabin and pushed it open. "Clear," he said to Shadow. The dog trotted inside. Shadow checked the living room, the small kitchen, and the single bedroom. Once he was satisfied that the cabin was empty, Shadow sat by the fireplace and looked at Jasper. "Good boy," Jasper said. He dropped his bag on the wooden floor. The cabin smelled like old pine and dust. Jasper opened the windows to let the fresh air in. He spent the rest of the afternoon chopping wood and organizing his gear. As the sun went down, the air turned cold. Jasper built a fire in the stone fireplace. He cooked 2 steaks in an iron pan. He ate one and gave the other to Shadow. They sat together on the rug by the fire. Shadow rested his heavy head on Jasper's leg. Jasper stroked the dog's thick fur. For the first time in months, Jasper felt his muscles truly relax. The next morning, Jasper woke up early. The sun was just rising over the mountain peaks. He drank a cup of black coffee on the wooden porch. Shadow sat beside him, watching the tree line. "Let us go for a long walk," Jasper said. He went inside and laced up his heavy hiking boots. He packed a small backpack with water bottles, a first aid kit, and some protein bars. He clipped a sturdy nylon collar around Shadow's neck. They stepped off the porch and walked into the dense forest. The trees were massive. Their thick branches blocked out most of the sunlight. The ground was covered in dry leaves and broken twigs. Jasper moved quietly. His military training made his footsteps light and controlled. Shadow walked 5 paces ahead. The dog navigated the uneven terrain with ease. He occasionally stopped to sniff a rabbit trail or listen to a distant bird. They hiked for 3 hours, moving deeper into the Appalachian wilderness. The terrain became steeper and more difficult. Jasper felt the familiar burn in his leg muscles. He enjoyed the physical effort. It cleared his mind. Eventually, Jasper heard the sound of rushing water. They had reached the bottom of a deep ravine. A wide stream flowed rapidly over smooth gray rocks. "Time for a break," Jasper said. He dropped his backpack on a large, flat stone. He felt thirsty. He pulled out a water bottle for himself and a collapsible bowl for Shadow. Shadow approached the edge of the stream. The water looked crystal clear. The dog lowered his head toward the surface. Suddenly, Shadow stopped. The German Shepherd took a quick step back. He let out a sharp whine. He looked at the water, then turned and looked at Jasper. "What is it?" Jasper asked. Shadow gave a short, warning bark. He walked back to the water, sniffed the air just above the surface, and immediately backed away again. He bumped his nose hard against Jasper's leg, pushing him away from the bank. Jasper stood up. His relaxed posture vanished. He knew his dog. Shadow never acted like this without a very good reason. Jasper stepped closer to the water. He knelt on the rocky bank and looked closely at the stream. The water appeared normal, but then the wind shifted. Jasper caught a strange scent. It did not smell like mud or algae. It smelled like burnt plastic and harsh chemicals. "Good boy, Shadow," Jasper said quietly. His eyes narrowed. "Show me." Shadow lowered his nose to the dirt. He led Jasper slowly downstream, staying several feet away from the water. Jasper followed closely. The strange chemical smell grew much stronger. Jasper also noticed that the woods had gone completely silent. There were no birds singing. There were no insects buzzing. They walked around a massive fallen tree. Jasper stopped dead in his tracks. The bank of the stream here was covered in a thick, dark gray foam. The ugly foam clung to the rocks and the roots of the nearby trees. But the foam was not what caught Jasper's attention. Jasper saw the bodies. More than a dozen dead fish floated near the muddy bank. A lifeless raccoon lay on the gray stones, its mouth covered in the same gray foam. A few yards away, Jasper spotted the carcass of a young deer. The deer had no bullet wounds or animal bites. It looked like it had simply taken a drink and collapsed on the spot. Shadow let out a low, deep growl. The dog pressed his thick body tightly against Jasper's side. Jasper looked at the dead animals, then looked at the rushing water. This stream flowed straight down the mountain. It fed directly into the main river that supplied the entire town below. Someone was dumping highly toxic waste into the water supply. Jasper looked upstream toward the higher peaks. His vacation was over. He was a soldier, and innocent people were in danger. "Come on, Shadow," Jasper said. His voice was cold and focused. "Let us go find out who is doing this." He adjusted his backpack and began to walk upstream. Shadow took the lead. The dog kept his belly low to the ground. They moved with absolute caution. The Appalachian woods grew thicker here. Pine branches scratched against Jasper's arms. The chemical smell became overpowering. It burned Jasper's nostrils. The water in the stream changed color. It turned from clear blue to a sick, milky gray. More dead wildlife littered the banks. Jasper saw dead frogs, small birds, and raccoons. The silence of the forest felt heavy and wrong. Nature had completely abandoned this place. Jasper knew military tactics. He treated this hike like a reconnaissance mission. He placed his boots carefully. He avoided dry leaves and loose rocks. After 40 minutes of steep climbing, the sound of rushing water mixed with a new noise. It was the loud, mechanical hum of heavy machinery. Jasper signaled Shadow to stop. He raised his hand. The dog immediately sat and froze. Jasper crawled forward on his stomach. He moved toward a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Shadow crawled right beside him. They peeked over the edge of the rocky ridge. Below them sat a massive, hidden mining operation. Large bulldozers tore up the earth. Deep trenches cut through the green valley like open wounds. Metal scaffolding surrounded a deep pit. But the worst part was the pipes. 3 thick black plastic pipes ran from a makeshift processing plant directly into the mountain stream. Thick gray chemical sludge poured out of the pipes. The sludge hissed as it hit the water. This was the poison. Jasper pulled a small pair of binoculars from his backpack. He scanned the camp. Armed men walked the perimeter. They carried hunting rifles and wore tactical vests over flannel shirts. This was not a legal operation. Legal mines did not need armed mercenaries. Dust kicked up on the dirt road leading into the camp. A vehicle approached the main gate. Jasper focused his binoculars. It was a police cruiser. The car had the local county sheriff logo painted on the side. The cruiser parked near the main processing trailer. A man stepped out of the driver's side. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s. He wore a crisp tan police uniform. A silver star badge gleamed on his chest. He had a thick mustache and a confident, arrogant walk. This was Sheriff Miller. Another man walked out of the trailer to meet him. This man was tall and thin. He wore a yellow hard hat and a dirty gray jumpsuit. His face was covered in soot and grease. He looked like the manager of the illegal site. Jasper watched closely. The two men did not look like police officer and suspect. They looked like business partners. They shook hands. The manager reached into his deep pocket. He pulled out a thick brown envelope. He handed it to Sheriff Miller. Miller opened the envelope, checked the stacks of cash inside, and smiled. He patted the manager on the shoulder and put the money inside his uniform jacket. Jasper felt a cold anger in his chest. The local law enforcement was protecting the poisoners. The sheriff was taking bribes while the town's water supply turned toxic. Jasper knew he could not just call the local police. The corruption went straight to the top. He needed evidence. He needed to get this information to the federal authorities. Jasper reached for his digital camera in his backpack. He needed a photo of that cruiser and the pipes. He shifted his weight on the rocky ground to get a better angle. His heavy combat boots slipped on a patch of wet moss. His foot slid backward. His heel slammed down onto a thick, dry pine branch. Snap! The cracking sound echoed like a gunshot across the quiet ridge. Jasper froze. His heart pounded in his chest. He cursed his mistake. Down in the valley, Sheriff Miller stopped talking. The mine manager turned his head toward the ridge. The armed guards stopped their patrols. They all looked up at the exact spot where Jasper was hiding. Then, a terrifying sound filled the valley. Dogs. 3 aggressive guard dogs, heavy pit bull mixes, charged toward the slope. They barked furiously. The guards pointed their rifles at the ridge. "Intruder!" one of the guards shouted. "Up on the ridge!" Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the trees above Jasper's head. Bark exploded from the pine trunks. "Move!" Jasper yelled. Shadow spun around and sprinted into the dense forest. Jasper ran right behind him. He kept his head low. The terrain was incredibly rough. Roots caught at his boots. Branches whipped his face. He ignored the pain. The sound of shouting men and barking dogs echoed behind them. More bullets ripped through the leaves. Jasper zigzagged through the trees. He used the massive oak trunks as cover. Shadow led the way, finding the fastest path through the thick brush. The German Shepherd moved with incredible speed. "Keep going, Shadow," Jasper commanded. They reached a steep decline. Jasper did not hesitate. He slid down the muddy hill, riding the dirt and rocks to the bottom. Shadow leaped gracefully down the slope. They hit the bottom and kept running. They crossed a shallow creek to hide their scent from the pursuing dogs. Jasper pushed his body to the absolute limit. He ignored the burning in his lungs and the deep scratches on his arms. They ran for miles without stopping. He navigated through a dense patch of thorny bushes, letting the sharp branches tear his clothes rather than slow him down. Finally, the sounds of dogs and men faded into the distance. The forest became completely quiet again. Jasper stopped and leaned against a large oak tree. He breathed heavily. Shadow stood next to him, panting, his ears still swiveling to catch any distant sound. Jasper wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked back toward the direction of the mine. They had escaped the bullets. But Jasper knew the truth. Sheriff Miller knew someone was watching. The corrupt sheriff would not let this go. Jasper was now a target in a town where the law was the enemy. The morning sun broke through the dense canopy of the Appalachian forest. Jasper sat on the wooden porch of his rented cabin. He held a piece of clean cloth against his left arm. The escape from the mining camp had left a deep, jagged scratch just below his shoulder. A sharp branch had torn right through his jacket during the frantic run. The wound was not fatal, but it looked inflamed. It needed proper cleaning to prevent infection. Shadow lay quietly by his feet. The German shepherd rested his heavy head on his front paws, but his golden eyes stayed completely open. He watched the dark tree line without blinking. The dog knew they were no longer safe. Jasper threw the bloody cloth into a small metal bin. He needed medical supplies. His small military first aid kit did not have enough antiseptic for a wound this deep. He also needed to gauge the atmosphere of the town. He wanted to know exactly how much control Sheriff Miller truly had over the local people. "Let us go to town, Shadow," Jasper said. He grabbed his truck keys. Shadow instantly jumped up and followed him to the old vehicle. They drove down the winding mountain road toward the center of the small town. The town looked like a postcard from a forgotten decade. Old brick buildings lined the narrow main street. A hardware store, a small diner, and a gas station stood quietly under the morning sun. Very few people walked on the concrete sidewalks. Those who did kept their heads down and walked quickly. Jasper parked his truck in front of a small, white wooden building. A faded, painted sign above the door read, "Town Clinic." Jasper told Shadow to stay in the truck with the windows rolled halfway down. He stepped out and walked into the clinic. A small brass bell rang as he opened the front door. The waiting room was completely empty. A moment later, an older man walked out from a back examination room. He was Dr. Evans. He looked to be in his late 60s. He had thinning gray hair, a slightly stooped posture, and kind, tired blue eyes behind thick eyeglasses. He wore a clean but very faded white lab coat. "Good morning," Dr. Evans said. His voice sounded gentle but distinctly nervous. "How can I help you?" "I had a rough hike," Jasper replied. He pulled back his sleeve to reveal the deep scratch on his muscular arm. "A branch got me. I need it cleaned and bandaged." Dr. Evans nodded and motioned for Jasper to sit on a padded examination table. The doctor moved slowly but efficiently. He gathered some cotton, dark iodine, and clean white bandages. He began to clean the wound. The iodine stung, but Jasper did not flinch or change his expression. "You are not from around here," Dr. Evans noted quietly. "Just passing through? Taking a vacation," Jasper said. "Rented a cabin up near the ridge. It is beautiful up there, but the wildlife seems a bit strange. I saw some dead animals near a stream yesterday. The water smelled like heavy chemicals." The exact moment Jasper mentioned the water, Dr. Evans froze. His hand trembled slightly, holding the cotton. He stopped wiping the wound. The color completely drained from the old doctor's face. He looked nervously toward the clinic's front window, then back down to the tiled floor. "Sometimes the natural sulfur springs act up," Dr. Evans said. His voice was suddenly very quiet and tight. "It is best to stay away from the deep woods. Stick to the marked trails, son." Jasper noticed the intense fear in the man's eyes. It was a deep-rooted terror. "It did not look like sulfur, doctor. It looked like industrial waste." Dr. Evans wrapped a bandage tightly around Jasper's arm. He refused to look Jasper in the eye anymore. "You are done here," the doctor said quickly. "No charge for the bandage. Please, just enjoy the main town and leave the woods alone, for your own good." Jasper understood. The doctor was terrified of whoever controlled this valley. He thanked the man and walked out of the clinic. As Jasper stepped onto the sidewalk, a large shadow blocked the morning sun. Sheriff Miller stood right in front of him. The heavy-set lawman rested his thumbs on his thick leather gun belt. He wore dark aviator sunglasses that hid his eyes, but his mouth twisted into a cruel smile. Two younger deputies stood a few feet behind him. "Morning, stranger," Sheriff Miller said. His voice was loud and carried a fake friendliness. "Hear you had a little accident up in the woods yesterday." Jasper kept his face completely blank. His military training kept his heart rate perfectly steady. "Just a scratch from a branch, Sheriff." Sheriff Miller took a step closer. He invaded Jasper's personal space. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne radiated from him. "Those woods are treacherous," Miller said softly. The fake smile vanished instantly. "People get lost up there all the time. Sometimes they fall down steep ravines. Sometimes the wild dogs get them. It is a real shame." Jasper looked straight into the dark lenses of the sheriff's sunglasses. He did not step back. "I can handle myself." Miller leaned in closer. "Listen to me very carefully, boy. I know you were snooping around the ridge yesterday. You saw things that do not concern you. This town is my jurisdiction, my rules. Your vacation is officially over." The sheriff poked a thick finger hard into Jasper's chest. "Pack your bags. Put that mutt of yours in your truck. Drive out of my valley before sunset. If you are still here tomorrow morning, I will not be so polite. Do we understand each other?" Jasper brushed the sheriff's finger away. His movement was slow, but incredibly firm. "I hear you, Sheriff." Miller smirked. "Good. Have a safe drive." He turned and walked away, his deputies following closely behind. Jasper walked back to his truck. Shadow whined from the passenger seat. The dog sensed his owner's rising anger. Jasper started the engine and drove out of town. He headed back up the mountain road toward his rented cabin. The drive back felt much longer. Jasper kept checking his rearview mirror, but no police cars followed him. He turned onto the dirt path leading to his cabin. As he pulled into the small clearing, he slammed on the brakes. The front door of the cabin hung wide open. The wood around the lock was completely splintered. Jasper killed the engine. He reached under his seat and pulled out a heavy steel flashlight. It was not a gun, but it was a solid weapon in his trained hands. "Shadow, stay close," Jasper commanded. They moved cautiously toward the porch. Shadow let out a low, menacing growl. The dog's hackles raised along his spine. He smelled the intruders. Jasper stepped inside. The cabin was destroyed. Every single piece of furniture was broken. The sofa cushions were slashed open, spilling white foam across the floor. The wooden dining table was smashed in half. The kitchen cabinets hung off their hinges, and broken plates covered the floorboards. Jasper moved to the bedroom. His olive-green duffel bag was gone. His clothes were shredded and scattered everywhere. Whoever did this was looking for something specific. They were looking for cameras, phones, or any physical evidence of the illegal mine. They wanted to erase any proof Jasper might have gathered. Sheriff Miller had not just given a warning, he had sent a brutal message. This was a direct threat to Jasper's life. They wanted him to run away in fear. Jasper stood in the middle of the ruined living room. He looked at the slashed furniture and the broken glass. He thought about the dead deer near the toxic stream. He thought about the terrified look in Dr. Evans's eyes. This town was being held hostage by a corrupt badge. The local people here were too scared to fight back. Jasper dropped the heavy flashlight onto a nearby chair. He clenched his fists. The Navy SEAL inside him woke up fully. He had spent his life fighting terrorists and tyrants in foreign lands. He would not let a corrupt, greedy sheriff destroy an American town and poison its land. He looked down at his faithful dog. Shadow looked back up at him, ready for a command. "We are not leaving, Shadow," Jasper said. His voice was cold as ice. "They want a war. We will give them one. Tonight we go back to the mine. We get the proof." Night fell over the Appalachian Mountains. The air grew cold and sharp. Jasper stood inside his ruined cabin. He ignored the broken furniture scattered around him. He focused entirely on his mission. He opened a hidden compartment in the thick sole of his spare combat boot. He pulled out a small, high-resolution digital camera. It was specifically built for night operations and stealth reconnaissance. Shadow sat by the door. The German Shepherd watched Jasper prepare. Jasper dressed in dark, form-fitting clothing. He applied black grease paint to his face and neck to eliminate any reflection in the moonlight. He checked the batteries in his heavy tactical flashlight. Finally, he clipped a fixed-blade combat knife to his thick leather belt. He did not have a firearm, but a SEAL was never unarmed. He knew how to use his environment to his advantage. "Time to work, Shadow," Jasper whispered into the dark room. They left the cabin and melted into the dense forest. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick pine canopy above them. Jasper navigated by memory and pure instinct. He actively avoided the main hiking trails. He deliberately chose the steepest, most difficult paths through the brush. He knew the corrupt sheriff's men would only guard the easy, accessible routes. Shadow moved like a ghost beside him. The dog's dark fur blended perfectly with the shifting shadows of the trees. It took them 2 grueling hours to reach the rocky ridge above the illegal mine. The valley below looked very different at night. Bright halogen work lights illuminated the main dirt yard, casting harsh shadows. The heavy mining machinery sat silent and cold. 3 armed guards patrolled the outer perimeter. They walked in slow, lazy circles. They smoked cigarettes, laughed, and talked loudly. They clearly did not expect any kind of attack. Jasper observed their patrol patterns for 20 full minutes. He timed their movements down to the second. He waited patiently for a gap in their visual coverage. "Stay," Jasper signaled to Shadow with a quick hand gesture. The dog immediately flattened his large body against the cold, rocky ground. Jasper slipped over the edge of the ridge. He moved down the steep slope in complete, absolute silence. He used the large boulders and deep shadows as cover. He reached the bottom of the valley and darted quickly behind a massive metal bulldozer. He waited, holding his breath. A guard walked past his hiding spot, completely unaware of the soldier crouching just inches away. Jasper moved swiftly toward the main processing trailer. He found the source of the poison. Dozens of large steel barrels sat stacked near the thick plastic pipes. The barrels had bold, toxic hazard warning labels printed on their sides. Jasper raised his digital camera. He took several clear, focused photos of the barrels, the hazard labels, and the pipes leading directly into the town's fresh water supply. Next, he needed hard documentation. He crept toward the manager's wooden trailer. The door was locked tight. Jasper pulled a small lockpick set from his tactical pocket. He bypassed the cheap padlock in exactly 10 seconds. He slipped inside the dark office and closed the door without making a single sound. He turned on his camera. He used its low-light lens to scan the small room. He found a thick stack of shipping manifests and payment logs sitting openly on the messy desk. The documents clearly linked Sheriff Miller's name to the illegal chemical dumping payouts. Jasper systematically photographed every single page. He captured the dates, the exact dollar amounts, and the handwritten signatures. He now had enough solid evidence to put the corrupt sheriff in federal prison for decades. Jasper left the trailer and locked the door carefully behind him. He climbed back up the steep dirt slope and reunited with his dog. "Got it," Jasper whispered, patting the dog's head. He removed the tiny SD card from the side of the camera. He knew these woods were incredibly dangerous. He needed a reliable backup plan to protect the hard evidence. He opened a small, waterproof zipper pouch attached to Shadow's heavy nylon tactical collar. He placed the memory card safely inside and sealed it completely tight. "If we get separated, you run," Jasper told the dog firmly. He looked deep into Shadow's intelligent golden eyes. "You protect this collar. Do not let them catch you." Shadow gave a quiet whine and licked Jasper's rough hand. They began their tactical retreat. Jasper planned to take a completely different route back to the mountain cabin. They moved carefully through a narrow gorge flanked by high, sheer rock walls. The cold wind howled loudly through the narrow space. Suddenly, Shadow stopped dead in his tracks. The dog's ears pinned back flat against his skull. He let out a deep, rumbling growl from his chest. Jasper instantly dropped to one knee. He drew his combat knife. He listened intensely to the wind. Bright spotlight beams suddenly snapped on and blinded them. The harsh lights came from the top of the rock walls on both sides. They were trapped in the middle of the gorge. "Do not move." A loud, arrogant voice echoed through the night air. It was Sheriff Miller. 6 large men stepped out from behind the boulders directly ahead of them. 4 more men stepped out to block the path behind them. They all carried heavy wooden clubs, thick tree branches, and solid metal pipes. Sheriff Miller stood safely behind his hired thugs. He held a high-powered police flashlight. "I told you to leave my town," Miller yelled down at them. "Now you are going to disappear in my woods." The men charged forward all at once. Jasper did not hesitate for a second. He lunged forward to meet them. He dodged a wildly swinging metal pipe and struck the first attacker hard in the chest. The man collapsed instantly, gasping for air. Another thug swung a heavy wooden club at Jasper's head. Jasper blocked the brutal strike with his left forearm, grabbed the man's thick jacket, and threw him violently against the solid rock wall. Shadow leaped bravely into the fight. The German Shepherd clamped his powerful jaws firmly onto the arm of a thug who was trying to hit Jasper from behind. The man screamed in agony and dropped his weapon. Shadow pulled him heavily to the dirt ground, viciously shaking his head to totally disable the attacker. "Get the dog!" Miller screamed in a panic. 2 large men rushed directly at Shadow, raising their heavy metal pipes high in the air. "Shadow, fall back," Jasper commanded loudly. Jasper threw his own body between the ruthless attackers and his loyal dog. He took a brutal, heavy hit to his left shoulder. The intense pain flared immediately, but he completely ignored it. He kicked the closest attacker right in the knee, shattering the joint with a sickening crunch. But there were simply too many of them in the narrow space. A heavy, unseen blow struck Jasper hard in the back of his legs. He stumbled forward. Another solid pipe smashed directly into his ribs. He heard the bone crack sharply. He swung his knife wildly, desperately keeping the violent men away from Shadow. He fought with the fierce ferocity of a highly trained warrior. He dropped 2 more men to the bloody dirt, but he was losing his strength and his blood very quickly. "Hold him down!" Miller shouted from the back. 3 heavy men tackled Jasper at the exact same time. They pinned him forcefully to the cold dirt. A heavy work boot kicked his right hand, forcing him to drop the combat knife. Shadow barked wildly, jumping back into the chaos. The brave dog bit the leg of one of the men holding Jasper down. "Run, Shadow!" Jasper roared with all his remaining strength. "Run away!" Shadow hesitated for a split second. He clearly did not want to leave his master behind. One of the thugs raised a heavy iron pipe, aiming right for Shadow's skull. Jasper used his very last ounce of adrenaline to twist his pinned body and kick the thug hard in the chest. The man stumbled backward and entirely missed the dog. Sheriff Miller finally walked forward. He held a thick wooden baseball bat. He looked down at the bleeding, defeated soldier. "Say goodbye, soldier," Miller sneered coldly. The corrupt sheriff swung the heavy bat as hard as he could. It connected brutally with the side of Jasper's head. The entire world exploded in bright white light. Jasper's vision quickly faded to absolute black. The thugs dragged Jasper's limp, bleeding body to the jagged edge of the deep ravine. Without a single second thought, they tossed him roughly over the edge. Jasper's broken body tumbled down the steep, rocky drop into the freezing, dark river below. Up on the high ridge, the violent men laughed together. They thought their biggest problem was permanently solved. They did not notice that the dark German Shepherd had already vanished silently into the deep shadows, carrying the ultimate truth secured safely around his neck. Shadow stood perfectly still in the dark brush at the top of the ridge. He watched the corrupt men leave the area. He waited until the sound of their heavy boots faded completely into the distance. Once the ridge was totally clear, the brave German Shepherd moved to the jagged edge of the cliff. He looked down into the pitch-black abyss. The drop was nearly vertical. Loose rocks and wet dirt made it incredibly dangerous. Shadow did not care about the danger. His master was down there. The dog began his perilous descent. He slid down the steep rock wall on his belly, He used his thick, strong claws to grip the jagged stones and twisted roots. He fell several feet, scraping his flank painfully against sharp rocks, but he quickly caught himself. He climbed down with pure, unbroken determination. He ignored the pain in his paws and the freezing wind whipping through the narrow gorge. Shadow finally reached the bottom. The loud sound of the rushing water was completely deafening. The darkness here was absolute. Shadow lowered his head and sniffed the cold air. His keen nose cut through the smell of the damp earth and the toxic chemical sludge. He smelled the fresh, warm scent of human blood. It was Jasper's blood. Shadow rushed along the rocky bank. He found his master lying half submerged in the freezing river. Jasper's face was ghostly pale in the faint moonlight. His breathing was terribly shallow and uneven. Shadow whimpered quietly. He stepped into the icy water. He grabbed the thick fabric of Jasper's tactical jacket with his powerful jaws. The dog planted his paws deep into the thick mud and pulled backward with all his might. He strained every single muscle in his strong back and legs. Slowly, step by agonizing step, Shadow dragged Jasper's heavy, unconscious body out of the freezing water. He pulled him onto a flat, dry patch of grass safely under an overhanging rock. Shadow shook the icy water from his dark coat. He immediately curled his large, warm body tightly around Jasper to share his body heat. He licked the blood and mud from Jasper's cold face. Jasper did not wake up. He did not move at all. Hours passed slowly in the dark. The temperature dropped closer and closer to freezing. Shadow stayed completely alert. He kept his ears raised and his eyes open. He listened to every single sound in the deep forest. Then the dog's right ear twitched. He heard the soft, distinct rustle of dry leaves breaking under light footsteps. He smelled wild fur and intense hunger. A pack of wild coyotes had smelled the fresh blood. They emerged slowly from the dark tree line. There were 5 of them. They were lean, incredibly hungry, and highly dangerous. They saw the bleeding, helpless man and moved closer in a tight, predatory circle. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the dark. Shadow stood up instantly. He placed his body directly between Jasper and the wild pack. The German shepherd bared his sharp white teeth. He let out a terrifying, thunderous growl from deep inside his chest. The coyotes stopped their advance, but they did not retreat. They smelled a free meal, and they outnumbered the lone defender. The large alpha coyote lunged forward, snapping its jaws toward Jasper's leg. Shadow met the attack with explosive violence. He clamped his jaws directly onto the alpha coyote's thick neck and threw the wild animal violently to the rocky ground. The rest of the wild pack instantly swarmed him. Shadow fought with the unmatched fury of a highly trained military dog. He snapped, bit, and tore at the wild predators. He took painful bites to his back legs and shoulders, but he never yielded a single inch of ground. He fought strictly to kill, protecting his vulnerable master at all costs. He broke the front leg of one coyote with a brutal bite. He tore a huge chunk of fur and skin off another. The wild animals quickly realized this meal was absolutely not worth the brutal, bloody cost. The bleeding alpha coyote whimpered in pain and ran away into the dark forest. The rest of the terrified pack immediately followed their leader, vanishing back into the shadows. Shadow stood victorious over Jasper, breathing heavily. Blood dripped from several minor bite wounds on his legs, but he completely ignored the pain. He checked his master again. Jasper's skin felt like solid ice. His pulse was dangerously weak and fading fast. Shadow nudged Jasper's cold hand with his wet nose, but there was absolutely no response. The highly intelligent dog understood the grim reality. His body heat was simply not enough. Jasper was dying. Shadow needed to find human help, and he needed to find it right this second. The dog looked up the steep wall of the gorge. He looked back at his dying master one last time. He gave a soft, reassuring bark, promising to return. Shadow sprinted away from the riverbank. He found a slightly less steep path up the side of the ravine. He scrambled up the muddy slope with frantic energy. His bleeding paws slipped on the wet rocks, but he pushed forward relentlessly. He reached the top of the ridge and ran blindly into the deep woods. The first faint light of early dawn began to paint the sky a dull gray. Shadow ran with blinding speed. He jumped over massive fallen logs. He pushed through dense thorn bushes that tore at his coat. He ignored his extreme exhaustion. He focused entirely on the distant, heavy sound of tires rolling on asphalt. He burst out of the tree line and stopped at the very edge of a 2-lane mountain highway. The road was slick with morning dew. A thick, white fog covered the asphalt. In the distance, bright headlights cut through the heavy mist. The loud roar of a massive diesel engine echoed loudly through the quiet valley. It was a heavy logging truck. The massive vehicle moved fast down the winding mountain road. Shadow did not wait safely on the side of the road. He stepped directly into the middle of the highway and stood firmly in the truck's lane. The truck driver, a tired local man named Hank, rubbed his sleepy eyes. He suddenly saw a large, dark shape standing right in his path. Hank slammed his heavy boot hard onto the air brakes. The massive tires locked up instantly. The heavy truck skidded dangerously on the wet asphalt, leaving thick black tire marks. The loud air horn blasted through the foggy morning. The huge metal grille of the truck stopped just a few feet away from the brave German shepherd. Shadow did not flinch. He stood his ground perfectly. Hank opened his door and leaned out of the high cab. "Move out of the way, dog!" the driver shouted angrily. Shadow barked loudly. He ran toward the driver's side door, stopped, and ran a few feet back toward the dark forest. He stopped again and looked back at the angry man. He barked again, letting out an urgent, desperate sound. Hank frowned deeply. He climbed down from the cab to chase the dog away. But as he got closer, he noticed the fresh blood covering the dog's thick coat. He noticed the expensive, heavy-duty tactical collar securely fastened around the dog's neck. Hank had served in the military years ago. He immediately recognized that this was no wild stray animal. This was a highly trained working dog, begging desperately for help. Hank ran back to his cabin. He grabbed a heavy metal flashlight and a red first aid kit. He stepped back down to the asphalt. "All right, buddy," Hank said gently, turning on the bright flashlight. "Show me where to go." Shadow let out a loud bark. He immediately turned and sprinted back into the dark woods, leading the only hope for his master directly toward the deadly gorge. Hank slammed his heavy boot on the brake pedal. The large logging truck screeched to a halt in front of the small-town clinic. The morning sun was just starting to light up the quiet street. Hank jumped out of the cab. He ran to the passenger side and pulled the heavy door open. He carefully lifted Jasper out of the truck seat. The soldier was freezing cold and covered entirely in dark mud and dried blood. Shadow leaped out of the truck right behind them. The German shepherd stayed extremely close to Hank's legs. He let out a sharp, urgent bark. Hank kicked the front door of the clinic. The glass rattled loudly in the wooden frame. "Dr. Evans, open up! I have a dying man out here," Hank yelled. A warm yellow light flicked on inside. A moment later, Dr. Evans unlocked the door. The old doctor wore a wrinkled flannel shirt and dark trousers. He had clearly just woken up. His tired eyes widened in absolute shock when he saw Jasper's broken body. "Bring him to the back, right now," Dr. Evans ordered. His nervous demeanor from the previous day completely vanished. He was a medical professional, and his focus shifted entirely to saving a human life. Hank carried Jasper down the short hallway and placed him carefully on the bright steel surgical table. Shadow tried to follow them directly into the operating room. "The dog cannot come in here," Dr. Evans said firmly. Hank looked down at the loyal animal. "Stay here, buddy. Let the doctor work." Shadow whined softly, but he understood the command. The German shepherd sat obediently just outside the swinging wooden doors. He kept his golden eyes locked intensely on the small glass window of the operating room door. He refused to move a single inch from that spot. Dr. Evans immediately began the emergency medical procedures. He called his assistant, a woman named Clara. Nurse Clara arrived 10 minutes later. She was a woman in her mid-40s with short brown hair and very tired eyes. She wore pale blue medical scrubs. She gasped loudly when she saw the horrific extent of Jasper's injuries. "We have major internal bleeding," Dr. Evans said. He moved his hands quickly, checking Jasper's faint pulse and shallow breathing. 3 broken ribs, severe blunt force trauma to the skull, extreme hypothermia. We need to stabilize his core temperature and stop the bleeding immediately. Nurse Clara nodded quickly. She grabbed the necessary surgical tools, alcohol, and sterile bandages. They worked together for 3 agonizing hours. The small clinic operating room felt incredibly tense. "Doctor." Evans carefully set the broken ribs back into place. He stitched the deep, jagged wounds on Jasper's muscular arms and legs. He meticulously removed pieces of dirt and small rocks from the deep cuts. He continuously monitored the dangerously low heart rate. The medical machines beeped in a panicked rhythm several times. Nurse Clara had to inject adrenaline directly into Jasper's IV line to keep his failing heart beating. Jasper's supreme military fitness was the only thing keeping him alive. A normal man would have died in the freezing river long before the logging truck arrived. Finally, the heavy internal bleeding stopped. Dr. Evans wrapped Jasper's damaged head in thick white medical gauze. Jasper's breathing became slow but very steady. He was alive, but he remained trapped in a deep, unresponsive coma. "Move him to the intensive care room," Dr. Evans told Nurse Clara. He wiped a thick layer of nervous sweat from his forehead. "He needs constant, unbroken monitoring." They carefully rolled Jasper onto a comfortable hospital bed and pushed him into a small, isolated room at the very end of the hall. The room had one large window facing the quiet street and a heavy wooden door. Machines beeped rhythmically beside the bed, closely tracking Jasper's vital signs. Outside the clinic, the early morning slowly turned into afternoon. Shadow still sat faithfully by the front doors. Hank had left to finish his logging route, but he promised to check back later in the evening. Dr. Evans walked out to the waiting room and handed Shadow a metal bowl of fresh water and some cooked beef. "You saved his life, brave boy," Dr. Evans whispered to the dog. Shadow ate the food quickly, but immediately returned his intense gaze to the hallway leading to Jasper's room. Suddenly, the front door of the clinic swung open forcefully. Heavy boots stepped loudly onto the tiled floor. Sheriff Miller walked inside. 2 of his heavily armed deputies followed closely behind him. The sheriff wore his crisp tan uniform. He chewed aggressively on a wooden toothpick. He looked around the quiet waiting room and immediately noticed Shadow sitting near the hallway. Miller's face hardened instantly. He recognized the dark German shepherd from the ridge. "Morning, Doc," Miller said loudly. His rough voice echoed in the small clinic. Dr. Evans stepped nervously out of his office. He wiped his clean hands on a white towel. He tried hard to hide his rising fear, but his hands shook slightly. "Sheriff Miller, what brings you here?" "Got a radio report from a logger," Miller said. He walked closer to the doctor, invading his personal space. "Said he found a hiker who took a nasty fall down the gorge, brought him here. I am just doing my job and checking on the victim." "He is in critical condition," Dr. Evans replied. He kept his voice deliberately low. "He suffered severe physical trauma. We almost lost him twice this morning during surgery." Miller smiled slightly. It was a cold, incredibly cruel smile. "Is that right? Well, terrible accidents happen in these woods. Is he conscious? Did he say anything to you?" "No," Dr. Evans answered quickly. "He is in a deep coma. I do not know if he will ever wake up." "Let me see him," Miller demanded. Dr. Evans hesitated, but he knew he could not legally stop the sheriff. He led Miller down the quiet hallway. They stopped outside the small intensive care room. Miller looked through the glass panel in the door. He stared directly at Jasper's pale, unconscious face. The heart monitor beeped slowly and steadily. Dr. Evans stood right next to Miller. He watched the sheriff's reflection in the glass. The old doctor saw something that truly terrified him. Miller did not look like a concerned police officer. He looked like a frustrated, angry predator. The corrupt sheriff was incredibly furious that Jasper was still breathing. "Keep him comfortable, Doc," Miller whispered. His voice carried a dark, hidden meaning. "I will come back tonight to personally check on his progress. Make sure the clinic is completely quiet, absolutely no visitors." Miller turned abruptly and walked out of the clinic with his deputies. The front door clicked shut behind them. Dr. Evans stood alone in the hallway. A cold chill ran down his spine. He fully understood what Miller meant. The corrupt sheriff would never allow a living witness to survive. He was going to return when no one was around. He was going to finish the job his thugs failed to do in the woods. Jasper was a helpless, immobilized target lying in that bed. The old doctor looked back at Jasper. He thought about the toxic water ruining the land. He thought about the town living in constant fear and silence. Jasper was the only person brave enough to fight back. Dr. Evans decided he could no longer stand by and do nothing. He had to protect this brave soldier. Dr. Evans walked back to the front waiting room. He looked at the large German shepherd. Shadow stood up immediately, sensing the doctor's sudden change in posture. "Come here, boy," Dr. Evans whispered urgently. He walked to the side entrance of the clinic and opened the door. He signaled for Shadow to follow him outside. They walked quietly around the brick building to the back alley. Dr. Evans unlocked a small, hidden emergency door that led directly into Jasper's intensive care room. Shadow stepped quietly into the dim room. He immediately walked to Jasper's bed. He sniffed Jasper's resting hand and let out a very soft, emotional whine. "Listen to me," Dr. Evans said. He knelt down and looked the intelligent dog right in the eyes. He pointed directly to the dark space underneath the metal hospital bed. "Hide. Get under there. You protect him." Shadow looked at the doctor, looked up at Jasper, and then immediately crawled completely under the bed. His dark fur blended perfectly with the deep shadows in the room. He lay perfectly still. Not a single sound came from him. Dr. Evans locked the back door securely. He turned off the main overhead lights in the room, leaving only the dim glow of the medical monitors. He knew Sheriff Miller was coming back to kill. But the corrupt lawman had no idea what deadly guardian was waiting for him in the dark. The clock on the clinic wall clicked past midnight. The small mountain town lay completely silent under a heavy blanket of dark clouds. A cold wind blew through the empty streets, rattling the loose window panes of the old brick buildings. Inside the clinic, the main lights were off. Only the pale glow of the street lamps filtered through the front blinds, casting long shadows across the waiting room. Dr. Evans sat in his dark office at the front of the building. He held a cold cup of coffee. His hands shook slightly. He listened to the quiet hum of the small refrigerator and the distant ticking of the wall clock. He had sent Nurse Clara home hours ago. He wanted her safely away from the coming danger. He waited alone in the dark. He knew Sheriff Miller was coming. He just did not know exactly when. At the far end of the hallway, the intensive care room remained completely still. Jasper lay on the narrow hospital bed. His chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. The heart monitor beeped softly, projecting a faint green light across his pale, bandaged face. He remained trapped in a deep coma, entirely unaware of the deadly threat approaching him. Beneath the metal frame of the bed, the shadows seemed completely solid. Shadow lay perfectly still on the cold linoleum floor. The massive German shepherd did not make a single sound. His breathing was incredibly shallow and controlled. His dark coat made him entirely invisible in the dim room. But his senses were fully alert. His ears swiveled, catching every tiny vibration in the building. His nose analyzed the smell of the strong antiseptic, the warm blood of his master, and the cold air slipping under the wooden door. Outside the clinic, a dark vehicle parked silently 2 blocks away. Sheriff Miller stepped out into the cold night. He did not wear his crisp tan police uniform. He wore dark civilian clothes and thick black leather gloves. He did not want to leave any physical trace of his presence. He walked down the empty alley behind the clinic. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who owned the entire town. He knew the clinic layout perfectly well. Miller reached the back door. He pulled a specialized lockpick tool from his dark jacket pocket. He defeated the old lock in less than 30 seconds. The door clicked softly. He stepped inside the quiet hallway. He carefully closed the door behind him, locking it again from the inside. His first target was the local security system. Miller walked to a small utility closet near the break room. He opened the metal electrical box on the wall. He found the specific wires connecting the old security cameras. He pulled a sharp wire cutter from his pocket and snipped the main connections. The recording system died instantly. He smiled in the dark. There would be no visual record of his late-night visit. Miller reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a small medical syringe. The clear plastic tube was already filled with a deadly dose of concentrated potassium chloride. It was a calculated, intelligent choice. The chemical would cause a massive, instantaneous heart attack. A small-town doctor like Evans would simply record it as sudden cardiac arrest due to severe physical trauma. It was the perfect, untraceable murder. Miller walked slowly down the main hallway toward the intensive care room. His heavy tactical boots made very little noise on the tiles. He approached the heavy wooden door. He looked through the small glass panel. The green line on the heart monitor pulsed steadily. The soldier was completely helpless. Under the bed, Shadow's ears flattened against his skull. The dog smelled the familiar, hateful scent of stale coffee and cheap cologne. It was the man from the mountain ridge. It was the man who had ordered the brutal attack on his master. The German shepherd's muscles tensed tightly like coiled steel springs. He did not growl. He waited patiently for the perfect tactical moment. Miller turned the door handle. He pushed the door open slowly. He stepped into the room. The only sounds were the soft hum of the medical equipment and Jasper's slow breathing. Miller walked to the side of the bed. He looked down at the unconscious Navy SEAL. "You put up a good fight, soldier," Miller whispered in the dark. His voice was cold and entirely devoid of human empathy. "But you chose the wrong town to play hero. In this valley, I am the law. I am the absolute judge. And tonight, I am the executioner. No one challenges my authority and lives to tell about it." Miller removed the plastic cap from the deadly syringe with his teeth. He held the sharp needle up to the faint green light. He flicked the plastic tube once with his finger to remove any air bubbles. He reached down with his left hand to grab Jasper's main IV tube. He planned to inject the poison directly into the flowing liquid. The lethal chemical would reach Jasper's heart in less than 10 seconds. "Goodbye," Miller muttered softly. He moved the needle toward the soft plastic port of the IV line. Beneath the bed, Shadow finally erupted. The German shepherd launched himself from the complete darkness like a guided missile. He did not bark. He did not give a single vocal warning. He struck with pure, devastating military precision. 70 pounds of pure muscle crashed directly into Miller's legs. The sheriff lost his balance instantly. Before Miller could even understand what hit him, Shadow lunged violently upward. The dog's powerful jaws clamped down viciously onto Miller's right wrist. The force of the bite was catastrophic. Shadow's sharp teeth sank deep through the thick leather glove, tearing straight into muscle and crushing the bone beneath. Miller let out a horrific, piercing scream. The terrible sound shattered the quiet night. His fingers instantly lost all their strength. The deadly syringe dropped from his hand and rolled harmlessly away across the tiled floor. Shadow twisted his massive head violently. He pulled the sheriff forcefully to the ground. Miller crashed hard onto his back. His head bounced painfully off the cold linoleum. He gasped desperately for air, completely blinded by sudden, intense agony. "Get off me!" Miller screamed wildly. He thrashed on the floor. He reached toward his belt with his free left hand, desperately trying to grab his concealed firearm. Shadow did not give him a single second to recover. The dog shifted his grip. He released the crushed wrist and instantly lunged at the sheriff's throat. Shadow planted his heavy front paws firmly onto Miller's chest, pinning the heavy man completely to the floor. The dog lowered his large head. He placed his sharp teeth directly against the soft skin of the corrupt sheriff's neck. Shadow let out a deep, terrifying growl. The sound vibrated loudly in the small room. It was not a warning. It was a definitive promise of death. The dog's golden eyes burned with fierce loyalty and lethal intent in the dark. Miller froze completely. He stopped struggling. He dropped his left hand away from his weapon. He stared up at the massive, angry animal standing over him. He felt the sharp points of the dog's teeth pressing tightly against his jugular vein. One wrong move, one sudden twitch, and the dog would rip his throat entirely out. The ruthless sheriff, the man who controlled the entire valley with fear and violence, now lay completely terrified and helpless. He realized with absolute clarity that his life no longer belonged to him. It belonged entirely to the loyal guardian standing over him. Sheriff Miller lay completely frozen on the cold linoleum floor. His heavy chest heaved with panicked, shallow breaths. Shadow stood over him like a dark statue. The massive German shepherd kept his sharp teeth pressed firmly against the sheriff's throat. A low, continuous growl vibrated from deep inside the dog's chest. Miller felt the hot breath of the animal on his skin. He knew that any sudden movement would mean instant death. The deadly medical syringe lay uselessly on the floor a few feet away. Suddenly, the main overhead lights of the intensive care room clicked on. The sudden brightness blinded Miller for a brief second. "Do not move a single muscle, Miller," a loud, firm voice commanded. Miller squinted against the harsh light. Dr. Evans stood in the open doorway. The old, tired doctor no longer looked frightened. He stood incredibly straight. He held a heavy double-barrel hunting shotgun. The dark steel barrels pointed directly at the corrupt sheriff's head. Dr. Evans's hands were completely steady. "Call off the dog, Doc!" Miller screamed in a panicked, cracking voice. "Call him off right now!" Dr. Evans stepped fully into the room. He kept the shotgun raised. "The dog does not take orders from me, Sheriff. He only protects his master. And right now, he is the only thing keeping you pinned to the floor." Miller tried to shift his weight slightly. Shadow immediately tightened his grip just a fraction of an inch. A tiny drop of blood appeared on Miller's neck. The sheriff froze instantly, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "I told you not to move," Dr. Evans warned coldly. "You are making a huge mistake, Evans," Miller said. He tried to sound threatening, but his voice shook violently. "I am the law in this valley. When my deputies find out about this, they will burn this clinic down. They will bury you." Dr. Evans shook his head slowly. A look of deep disgust crossed his lined face. "You are not the law, Miller. You are just a greedy, violent thug. You have poisoned our water. You have terrified our town for years. You took bribes from illegal mining companies and let them destroy our home. I watched you do it. I stayed quiet because I was a coward. I was terrified of what you would do to my staff and my patients." "Doctor?" Evans glanced quickly at Jasper, who still lay in a deep coma on the bed. Then he looked back at Miller. "But this brave soldier changed everything. He came to our town for a vacation, and he risked his life to stop you. I could not let you finish him off in my own hospital. You have absolutely no proof of anything," Miller yelled desperately. "Actually, we do," a new authoritative voice called out from the hallway. Heavy, rapid footsteps echoed loudly on the tiled floor. 6 men wearing dark tactical vests burst into the intensive care room. The bold yellow letters FBI were printed clearly across their chests. They carried automatic rifles and moved with precise military efficiency. A tall federal agent stepped forward. He lowered his weapon slightly. "Dr. Evans contacted our field office in the city hours ago. He told us exactly what to expect tonight. We have had this entire building surrounded since midnight." Miller stared at the federal agents in absolute horror. His corrupt empire was crumbling right in front of his eyes. "Dr. Evans," the lead FBI agent said calmly, "can you ask the dog to step back?" Dr. Evans placed his shotgun on a nearby medical cart. He walked very slowly toward Shadow. He reached out and gently placed his hand on the dog's strong back. "It is over, boy," the doctor whispered softly. "You did your job. He is safe now." Shadow looked up at the doctor. The dog seemed to understand the calm tone. He slowly released his pressure on Miller's neck. Shadow stepped back carefully, but he did not leave the room. He moved directly to the side of Jasper's bed and sat down, keeping a watchful eye on the federal agents. The FBI agents immediately grabbed Miller. They pulled the corrupt sheriff roughly to his feet. They slammed him forcefully against the wall and locked heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. "Sheriff Miller, you are under arrest for attempted murder, corruption, and environmental crimes," the lead agent announced loudly. They marched the defeated, terrified man out of the clinic. The nightmare of the valley was finally over. The lead agent stayed behind in the room. He looked at Dr. Evans. The doctor mentioned that the soldier might have secured evidence before the attack. "Do you know where it is?" Dr. Evans looked at Shadow. He noticed the heavy, waterproof zipper pouch attached to the dog's thick nylon collar. The doctor slowly approached Shadow. He gently unzipped the small pouch. He reached inside and pulled out the tiny, dry SD memory card. He handed it to the federal agent. "I believe you will find everything you need right here," Dr. Evans said. The agent nodded respectfully. "Thank you, doctor, and thank the dog." 4 days passed. The small mountain town buzzed with incredible news. Federal authorities had raided the illegal mining camp. They arrested the manager and all the armed guards. They shut down the toxic dumping completely. The corrupt deputies in the local police force were all placed under federal investigation. For the first time in years, the people of the valley felt truly safe. Inside the quiet clinic room, bright morning sunlight filtered through the blinds. The medical monitors beeped in a slow, highly reassuring rhythm. Jasper lay quietly on the bed. His breathing was deep and natural. Slowly, very slowly, his dark eyes fluttered open. The bright light hurt his vision for a moment. He blinked several times, trying to clear his blurry sight. His entire body felt heavy and sore, but he was alive. He felt something warm and wet touch his right hand. Jasper turned his head slightly. Shadow sat directly beside the bed. The German shepherd's tail wagged softly. The dog rested his large chin gently on the edge of the mattress. His golden eyes looked at his master with pure, unconditional love. Jasper smiled weakly. He slowly raised his hand and rested it on the dog's thick head. He felt the familiar, coarse fur under his fingers. "Good boy, Shadow," Jasper whispered. His voice was incredibly rough and dry, but it was filled with deep emotion. "You did good." Shadow let out a happy, quiet whine. He licked Jasper's hand again. The brave soldier and his incredibly loyal guardian had survived the ultimate test. They had fought the darkness together, and they had won. This story reminds us that true courage does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet determination to stand up for what is right, even when the whole world seems against you. Jasper and his loyal dog Shadow showed us that the bond between a human and an animal can overcome the darkest of evils. They did not just save a town, they restored hope to people who had been silenced by fear. In my view, we all have a bit of that warrior spirit inside us. We just need the courage to let it out and protect the innocent when the time comes. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. May God bless you and your loved ones with strength, peace, and unwavering courage in the face of adversity. If you believe in the power of justice and loyalty, please type Amen in the comments.
sun is falling now, and the sun is falling down. I feel it, and I'm waiting for the smoke, and